and welcome to Crafts with Ash DIY and Decor. My name's Ashley, and today I put together a compilation video of my top 10 favorite Dollar Tree DIYs from this year. So all of these DIYs incorporate supplies and signs and just items from the Dollar Tree, so they were all budget friendly and super easy to put together. And I cannot wait to share them or reshare them with you today. Now, because I'm not very good at the whole editing thing, I had to screen record my videos from YouTube. So if you see random weird things pop up on the screen, just know that that happened because I'm screen recording. If you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, then hit that little notification bell so you can get notified anytime I upload a new video. Also, be sure to hit the all in the drop-down menu so you can get notified when I upload all of my videos. Then hop on over to Instagram and Facebook and give me a like and follow there, and let's get social. You can join my crafting community and see some behind-the-scene content that I know you're not gonna want to miss. Alright, I think we're ready to dive into these DIYs. It's a long one, so grab your popcorn, get a beverage, and let's get crafting. So one of my favorite DIYs that I've made actually was a fan favorite as well, and it was the Hello Summer sign that I made on a Try It Tuesday, and I was actually inspired from Whitney over at Whiskey and Wit. So what I did was take a round sign from the Dollar Tree, and then I gave it a really good coat of ivory chalk paint. After that was dry, I took this ruler and I put it right in the middle of my circle, and then I just made lines on either side to make it look like shiplap, and I did that all the way across my board. Next, I took my finger and I smudged each one of the lines to help it blend in and to really give that shiplap look. After that, I took that brush that had the paint on it. I didn't even re-dip it. I just used whatever paint was on the brush, and I just brushed over it to help it all blend in. After that, I put that to the side and I grabbed this pack of dominoes that I got from the Dollar Tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out 6 of the dominoes because I'm going to spell out summer. So the first thing I did was actually cut them down so they looked like the top of popsicles, because these are just a little bit too long. So I laid them all out on my board for positioning purposes and to test it, and then I'm going to cut off the bottom once I figure out how long I want them each to be. Now, I did use my miter shears to do this, and it worked to score it, and then I just popped it and snapped it right off and then sanded the bottom, and I did this to all 6 pieces. Real quick, I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to my channel. If you're new here, thank you so much for choosing to stop by. I really hope that you love what you see, and I hope you do stick around a while by subscribing to my channel. And if you're returning, thank you so much for coming back and for all of your support. I hope that you also love and have been loving what you're seeing, and I hope that you are a subscriber as well. After they were all cut and sanded down, I went ahead and painted each one of them a different color. So I do not remember the names of all of my paints, but I do know that this one is Pink Parfait from Apple Barrel. And then I put a yellow color on, and again, I don't remember the names. I think this was Apple Barrel as well. And then I know that I did an orange and a green and a blue, basically very bright summery colors. After all my little popsicles were dry, I took the stencil that I got from the Dollar Tree and I stenciled one letter on each popsicle to spell out summer. Now I used a makeup sponge for this. I have been finding that makeup sponges are the best for stenciling, in my opinion. I know that there's stencil brushes and stuff like that. I just like using the makeup sponges. I don't know, I just feel like they come out very clear. And also, the stencils from the Dollar Tree are really good as well. I've really enjoyed using these. So once these were all dry, I decided to clean up the edges just a little bit by taking my Sharpie black marker and outlining each letter. After that, I laid all of my popsicles on my board, and then I took these really small popsicle sticks. Now, my mother-in-law gave me this pack, so I'm not sure where they came from, but I think that Dollar Tree probably has these size as well. And I simply took 3 of them and cut them in half, so I ended up with 6 pieces all together. And then I went ahead and hot glued them to the back of my domino pieces. Now, you do want to make sure that they are all even with each other, like these sticks. So you're gonna see that I actually take the popsicles and line them all up and then hot glue the sticks on the back. After that, I positioned all of my popsicles at the bottom of my sign, and at this point, I had not glued them down. Then I'm going to take these black sticker letters from the Dollar Tree and I'm going to spell out the word hello right on top of the popsicles. Now, as you can tell, I'm not pushing the stickers down because at first I just lay them all down and then I'm going to move them how I need them to look so they're all even. Now, when I was doing this, I realized I didn't have an H, so I took 2 I's and then cut a little piece off for the center of the H. So just remember, you can always create things if you don't have them as well. Once I had them all positioned how I liked, I then went ahead and pushed all of my stickers down, and then to adhere the popsicles to the board, I'm going to use super glue and hot glue because this is actually going to my sister's house and she is going to put it on her front door, so I don't want the sun to melt the hot glue. So I would highly suggest, if you're going to make anything that's going to be outside, using a glue other than hot glue. But the reason why I do both is to put the super glue on there for the permanent hold and then the hot glue on there for the instant hold so I can keep working with my sign. Then, to protect all of my stickers and the paint, I put a nice coat of Mod Podge right on top. To add a little bit more cuteness to this, I decided to add a bow. Now, I am not the best at making bows, I'm going to be honest, so I'm kind of going to speed this up a little bit, but basically what I did was cut off 2 pieces of random ribbons that I thought would match, and I formed them into an X, and then I tied them together with some twine. Now, after I recorded this, I found some better ribbon at the Dollar Tree, so you're going to see in the picture that the ribbon is actually different, but this is exactly what I did to make the bow. I got this idea for a bow. It's called a refab bow over from Brooke Riley on Facebook from Refabbed, and it is a super easy way to make a bow, especially if you can't make the big fancy bows. And so this is always my go-to bow, but like I said, I'm gonna speed this up because I'm not the best, but hey, I tried. So after my bow was put together, I took the extra piece of twine that I left on there purposely and I threaded it through the hole on top. And then I simply tied a knot at the top of that twine to make a hanger. Now, to fix my bow a little bit, I'm going to go through and I'm going to dovetail the thicker ribbons, the wider ribbons, and then I'm simply going to cut the other smaller ribbons at an angle. Now I did tack down the twine with some hot glue and a piece of ribbon over it. That way it didn't move around. But after I tied the knot, that completed this really cute Hello Summer sign. Now I made a neutral wreath for my sister last year, and it's a burlap wreath. And so every season or every holiday, she actually goes through and she changes out the sign in the middle of the wreath. So that way it's the same wreath all year round, but the sign in the middle is seasonal and it's festive. So it actually works out really, really well. So I really love how this came out. Again, this was a fan favorite and I hope you love it too. For the second DIY, I grabbed this Easter sign that I had left over and I plucked off the little feet and the raffia bow and the eyes on the back, and then I flipped it over and gave it kind of a messy coat of ivory chalk paint. So I wasn't going for full coverage here, but I wanted it to be mostly covered, but if you can see some of the board underneath, that was okay too. Next, I took 3 of these metal flowers from the Dollar Tree and I took off the little hangers and the bells on each one of them. Now, this DIY came from my 4 ideas for these metal flower videos, and it is one of my most watched videos, so I think you guys were really loving it, and I really loved how this one came out too. Obviously, it made it in my top 10. So the first thing I did was take those flowers, and they were kind of curved down, so I'm just pushing all the petals up, if that makes sense, so that way they're not really touching the bottom. Then I'm going to dry brush that ivory chalk paint over each one of these flowers. I really loved the look that this gave because it dulled down the bright colors, but it still was colorful. So it was a good mix of rustic farmhouse, but fun as well, if that makes sense. And I think that actually is my style. I'm not even sure what to call it, but I need some color in my life. So that's why I think I really loved this one. And I did that to all 3 of those flowers. To distress my flowers, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and my distressing brush, and I just lightly brushed it over each one of the petals. Now, if you don't like pieces distressed or you don't like that antique rustic look, you can absolutely skip this step. That's the beauty of DIYing, because you do it yourself, and that way you create it how you like it. Now, after I put the wax on, I did go through and go over the wax with my ivory chalk paint to blend it all together so it wasn't so bold, so the wax wasn't so bold. And I really love the look that that gave. And again, I did this to all 3 flowers. After my flowers were finished, I took my board again after it had dried, and I took that ruler and stuck it right in the middle of the board and traced lines on either side. That way it give it that shiplap look. Then again, I took my finger and rubbed over the pencil. That way it blended it all in. Next, I decided to distress this too, so I took my Waverly Antique Wax and that brush, and I did the same thing I did to the flowers. I just dry brushed over my sign. Now, I did pay attention to the edges and the sides because I do want those to be a little darker, but after I did that, I sanded it all down to make it all blend in. Next, I took these 3 frames that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I first started off by ripping the little stands off the back, and then I am going to take the clip off of the front, and I did this to all 3 of those frames. Next, I took my long board and I positioned my frames one on top of the other. And then I took those flowers and put 1 flower on top of each one of my frames. Now, before I glued anything down, I decided that I wanted to make the frames a little darker. I just thought that it would help make the flowers pop more, so I just dry brushed over the edges of my frame with the Waverly Antique Wax. So as I was looking at my flowers, I just felt like it needed something, another little detail. So what I decided to do was to take some twine and hot glue twine in the middle of each one of my flowers. So I started in the middle, added a little hot glue, and then I just rolled it around each other until the entire middle section was covered. And again, I did this to all 3 of my flowers. Then to make that look a little bit more rustic, I just simply took some antique wax and dabbed it in the middle on top of the twine. Next, I brought my board back and I am going to hot glue the picture frames on the board. Now you want to make sure to put a good amount of hot glue so that way they stay on top. Now, in order to help make my flowers stick onto the frames, I had to put some craft sticks in the middle because there is a dip in the middle. So I wanted to hot glue those on to give it more surface to be glued. Now, I'm going to highly recommend that you add super glue to the sticks and to the metal because metal and hot glue do not mix, and I did have to fix this a couple times because I only hot glued it. So if you add super glue to all of anything that's touching metal, then you probably could prevent it from falling apart. So then I just hot glued 1 flower to each one of my frames. Next, I took some twine and I wrapped it a bunch of times around the top and the bottom. Then after that, the sign was complete, and like I said, I just absolutely love the colors in this sign. I kind of think it kind of gives off a shabby chic vibe as well, but it is just so pretty, and I got a lot of really amazing compliments on this one too. So I hope you really love it as well. For my next DIY, I absolutely loved this on my mom's back deck, and I made a towel holder. So what I did was grab this sign I had left over from Easter, and then I gave it one good coat of white Waverly chalk paint. After that was dry, I took that ruler again, and you guessed it, I drew on some shiplap lines. Now, instead of using a pencil this time, I used a Sharpie marker, and this Sharpie marker is actually kind of going dry, so it's not that bold. Now, I know my lines are not even. That's my bad. I don't know what I was doing there. Next, I took my sanding block and I sanded it down, and then I brushed over it with my paintbrush just to blend everything together. After that, I decided I wanted to dry brush some bright colors all over my board. So I took a chippy brush and I dipped it in some orange paint, and then I'm going to go over with some pink paint, and I'm just kind of mixing up the colors until I get it to how I like. After that was dry, I took this pack of Sandal Coasters, and it's a 4-pack, and I laid them each out across the board. Now, I really wanted this sign to be very colorful, as you can see, but if you just want it to be neutral or you want it to be a different color, you can always paint the foam to any color you like. Now, to glue this down, I used some super glue and hot glue because this is going outside, and again, we don't want the sun to melt the hot glue. So you're gonna have to use E6000, or I'm using the Fix All glue. But I just went ahead and I glued these all down. After they were glued down, I put that off to the side. I took a piece of painter's tape and I taped it upside down so the sticky part was on top. Next, I put these clear command hooks across the tape that I got from the Dollar Tree. That way it holds it while I paint these. I painted one with a bright pink color. I painted another with a green color. I painted the third one with a blue color, and then I painted the fourth one in yellow. And I gave each of these 2 coats of the paint. After they were dry, I laid them out on my sandals, and I just kind of mixed up the colors so that way the same color hook wasn't with the same color sandal, if that makes sense. And again, by using the super glue and the hot glue, I'm going to glue these hooks down on each of the sandals. Then, to protect the paint on all of my hooks, I went ahead and coated them with some Mod Podge. Now I wanted to dress up my sandals a little bit to give them a little bit more detail. So I just took the back of a paintbrush and dipped it in some paint and made some polka dots on my sandals. And then you're going to see that I actually hot glued some buttons to the middle of the flowers. You can decorate these however you want, and that way that you get the look that you love. Then I decided I wanted to add a little bit more color, so I took the pink and the orange again and just dry brushed over my sign. I really love how this came out. It's been on my mom's back deck for about almost a month now, and it's still holding up strong. So we love it to display all the towels and to hang them up to dry, and it's perfect. I hope you love it. For my next DIY, I'm going to start off with this big tag that I got from the Dollar Tree, and this obviously was left over from Valentine's Day. And I'm going to paint this with some white Waverly chalk paint. Now, I am not going to go for full coverage here. I am just making sure the majority of it is painted, but if some of that wood comes through, I'm totally okay with that. Once my paint was dry, I took this Waverly Antique wax and my distressing brush, and I just distressed this whole sign. So I just dry brushed over it. I did pay attention to the edges and the sides. That way they were highlighted a little bit, but I just made sure to give it that rustic look. Next, by using the sign, I'm going to draw my lines across. Clearly, this was before I bought that ruler from the Dollar Tree, so I had to just use any straight edge I had. But I just made lines going all the way across my board to look like shiplap. Then, to blend everything together, I sanded it all down. Next, I'm going to take this burlap ribbon that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to cut a piece so it's going to fit one piece on the top and one piece on the bottom. Now, I decided that I did not want the seams on my ribbon because I'm going to fray the edges, so I just simply cut them off, and then I'm going to pull around the sides of my ribbon to fray them. After I had both of my pieces cut out, I glued one of my pieces to the very bottom of my sign. Now you want to be careful because again, it is burlap, so you don't want to burn yourself. So I'm going to use my mask applicator tool that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to glue that down. Now, that other piece of ribbon that I cut was supposed to go at the top, but I actually decided that I wanted the bottom to be a little thicker, so I ended up gluing that piece of ribbon right on top or right above that first piece of ribbon. Now before I glued anything else to this sign, I needed to get my positioning figured out. So I'm going to spell out the word home, and I'm going to do H-O at the top and M-E at the bottom. And I'm going to use these stencils that I got from Amazon. I absolutely love these stencils. These are my favorite ones to use. They, I believe, are 3 inches, and they come out so clear, and I absolutely love it. So once I figure out where I want my letters to go, I'm just going to use some black acrylic paint, and I'm simply going to stencil these on. Now, I am only going to stencil on an H, an M, and an E because I'm going to do something else for the O. After that, it was time to embellish the top. So what I did was I cut off another piece of that burlap ribbon, and of course I cut the seams off, and then I'm going to fray the edges, and then I'm going to hot glue that to the top of my sign underneath the hole. Then again, I decided I wanted to make that a little wider, so I just did the same thing and I cut off a piece, cut off the edges, frayed them, and then hot glued it right above the first piece of ribbon. Next, I'm going to take this vine garland that I got from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to cut off a piece and then shape it into a form of an O. Now my ADD got the best of me, and instead of gluing down that little piece of vine, I jumped to the bottom of that sign again, and I grabbed some of this polka dot ribbon and I hot glued it in the middle of the ribbon so it hid the seam of those two burlap ribbons coming together. And then I did the same thing on the top. After that, I took some twine and I tied a little bow, and then I'm going to hot glue that to the top of my little vine, and then I'm going to hot glue all of it down. Next, to give it more of a rustic look, I took my sanding block and I sanded over the letters. Now, as I was looking at this, I realized it really was not proportional, so I decided to add one more piece of that burlap ribbon to the bottom, and then I'm going to add the polka dot ribbon on top. Then, to hide the seam of where the two polka dot ribbons come together, I decided to wrap some twine in the middle of those. And I just kind of wrapped and wrapped and wrapped until I got the thickness that I liked. To give it an extra hold, I did add a little piece of paper over the twine on the back. After that, I flipped it over, and now it's time to add a hanger. I cut off another piece of that twine, and I'm going to use some wooden beads to thread through it and make myself a little hanger. Once I had all of my beads threaded on, I just took some hot glue and I hot glued my knot at the bottom of my twine to the hole. If you're a Farmhouse fan, this sign was definitely for you. I really loved it, and it was so easy, and you can see as I was making it how it kind of transformed into something else. The next DIY was actually inspired by something I saw on 4-Quarter Crafts, and this was for another Try It Tuesday, and she made a really neat fairy garden. So I had painted this white, this big pot white, for a different DIY, and it didn't end up working, so I decided to use it for my fairy garden. So next I took this little metal bucket from the Dollar Tree, and I used 100% acetone to go ahead and take off all of the wording on my bucket. After that, I also gave this a couple coats of Waverly chalk paint in white. Once that was done, I put that off to the side to dry, and then I traced my big pot on a piece of foam board and then cut it out with a little knife. Now I needed to build up the inside of the pot so the foam had something to sit on. So I ended up having these cups and I put them in my pot. That way the foam board could rest on top. That was just the only thing I had closest to me that I could use. And it actually worked out perfectly. After I stuck my foam board in the pot, and it was so snug, I actually didn't even have to glue it, just fit perfectly in there. I put the smaller pot on top and traced around it, but you can actually skip this step because I did end up just covering the entire top of the foam board with this moss sheet. To do this, I just cut off little pieces and just kind of stuck them in there like a puzzle and then glued it all down. After my foam board was covered, I took these little wood pieces that I got at Hobby Lobby, and I never pay full price for anything over there, so you know I got these either at 40 or 50% off. But I just kind of started arranging them so it looked like steps leading up to the smaller bucket. And I just kind of layered them and kind of, I don't know, just kind of built a little scene. Once I had them all laid out where I liked, I started gluing them down by using hot glue. Now I did make sure to put some little wood chips on top of each other to kind of form steps in the front of my bucket because I am going to bring in a little fairy door that I believe also came from the Dollar Tree, and I am going to glue that on the front of my bucket right there. So as you see, I put my fairy door down, but I did have to build up the bucket a little bit because the fairy door is now taller than the bucket, but I didn't want it like that. So I just put two little wood chips underneath the bucket and that built it up perfectly. And then I went ahead and hot glued it all down. Now, every time I went to the Dollar Tree or Dollar General, I let my daughter pick out some fairy accessories to add to her fairy garden. So right here, I am just going to place all of her little accessories down. Now, I did end up gluing these down because she is 4. So I just knew that she would break these if they weren't glued down. So I had to make sure that this was also kid friendly. But I just kind of arranged these and made it look cute for her. And I gotta say, she's had this for a couple months and she really, really loves playing with it. After all the little pieces were glued down, I went ahead and took some greenery and some flower stems, just some extra ones I had laying around in my stash, and I just started adding some florals all over this fairy garden. I want to apologize about the angle of this video. This was kind of high on my desk and it was hard for me to position my camera, so I'm trying to do the best I can on showing you what I am doing, but I know it looks kind of weird, but just bear with me. Now, I kind of felt that I needed to add just a little bit more detail, so I took a sanding sponge and I sanded the bottom pot to kind of bring out that green color from underneath. This is your friendly reminder that if you're loving what you see today, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Not only does it really help my channel to grow, but it also tells YouTube that you're loving my content and that you want to see more. So don't forget to hit that like button. To personalize this just a little bit, I took these letters that I got from the Dollar Tree and I spelled out Amelia's Fairy Garden. After all my letters were placed on, I sanded over them just a little bit to make them look a little rustic, and then I coated over it with Mod Podge to protect them. Finally, I added some little fairy lights because what fairy garden isn't complete without fairy lights? And I just kind of weaved them in and out of all of the flowers. Now, mine are red because they were left over from Valentine's Day, but I think it added such a fun touch and it looks so cute at night, all lit up. My daughter absolutely loves this, and like I said, she's had it for a few months now and she still plays with it and puts all of her little people inside of it too. So I think this came out super cute and I think it shows how much she loves it too. My next DIY actually came from my video of my summer Kirkland's dupes, and I was going to dupe one of their long signs that says Sweet Summer. So the first thing I did was grab this leftover Easter sign. I plucked off the eyes of the bunny, the raffia bow, and the feet at the bottom. Next, I gave this a kind of messy-ish coat of white Waverly chalk paint, and by that I mean the majority I wanted covered, but it was okay if some of the wood underneath came through. While that was drying, I took this little box from the Dollar Tree. Now, I had one that I made for a DIY that never made it into a YouTube video because it definitely was a fail. So what I did was cut off the back of this little box, the rounded part, and it was super easy to do. You just had to score it and then it snapped right off. Next, I cleaned up the edges and I also sanded them down to make them nice and smooth. After that, I'm going to give this a coat of white Waverly chalk paint. And I'm only going to paint the front. I'm not even going to worry about the back. After that was dry, it was time to paint this to look like a watermelon. So I used some green paint and I painted around the edge and then a little bit on the front as well to make the rind of my watermelon. Next, I'm going to create my own mixture by using some red apple barrel paint and some white Waverly chalk paint. I'm going to mix it together, and then I'm going to paint that on my watermelon to make the actual watermelon part, the juicy part. Now, as you saw, I did leave space in between the green and the red with just the white. That way it looked like a watermelon. After that, I'm going to take a small little paintbrush, dip it in some black paint, and create some seeds. Then I decided I wanted my rind to be a little thicker, so I hit it again with that green paint. After my watermelon was done, I took my white board, because now it's dry, and I'm going to put my big ruler in the middle, and again, I'm just going to use that to create some shiplap lines. Next, I took those stencils that I got from Amazon that I used in that previous DIY, and I laid out the word summer on my sign. Now, because there's only one of each letter, I used an H to hold the place of the other M. That way, my spacing was all correct. And then after I got them all laid out, I simply stenciled them on with red acrylic paint. Now for my U, I used the watermelon, and I thought that this was super cute. Now for the word sweet, I'm using these smaller stencils that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use my green acrylic paint to stencil that word on top. After I was done stenciling that word on, I took my white chalk paint and I just cleaned up where some of the green paint got, and then I lightly brushed over the sweet word. That way it gave it more of a rustic look. Then I took a black Sharpie and I am tracing around each of my letters in summer just to clean up the edges a little bit. I also decided to outline the watermelon in the black Sharpie, that way it all coordinated together with the words. Then again, to give it that rustic look, I took my sanding sponge and I sanded over the whole thing. Next, I hot glued my watermelon down on my board. Finally, I took some black acrylic paint and a makeup sponge and I dry brushed just the edges of my sign. I did hit the middle of the sign very lightly, but I really wanted to pay attention to all of the edges, and I really think that this made it pop. To give it one final touch, I did decide to outline the word sweet in that black Sharpie. I really love how this came out. It was sitting out on our fireplace. That way we could welcome in sweet summer. I hope you love it too. For my next DIY, this was also a very popular one on that 4 Ideas for Metal Flowers video, and this is the little sunflower stand that we're going to make. So at first I started off with 3 of these metal flowers and I took the bells off of each of them and the hangers. Next, on all of the flowers, I am going to do the same thing, but I'm only going to show you on one. So I took some yellow acrylic paint and I painted all of the petals on all of the flowers. Now, I found it easiest to paint these by lifting up all of the petals and give each layer of petals a few coats. And then once that was done, go ahead and unfold the second layer, give those a bunch of layers or coats, and then unfold the top one, and etc. So I just do think it is so much easier to do it layer by layer. And I gave each of these flowers probably 3 coats of yellow paint. Now for the top layer of petals, the smallest layer, I decided to actually paint that with my chocolate brown apple barrel acrylic paint. Now, because you could see it underneath, I did hit the underneath part of the first layer. I hope you can see what I mean, because obviously you can see through. So then I gave this about 2 or 3 coats of that brown paint, and again I did this on all 3 of my flowers. After my brown layer of paint was on, I mixed in some black because I just wanted it to be a little darker. And then I just kind of dabbed that paint mixture all on the inside. I think that adding the black to that brown really helped to darken it, and I really like the color that ended up coming out. After that, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and a distressing brush, and I'm just dry brushing and distressing the yellow parts of my flower. Now, to add a little detail to the center of my sunflower, I decided to cut up this little piece of burlap and hot glue it to the circle part to kind of mimic or look like the seeds of a sunflower. So I just cut it in the shape of a circle, I frayed it, and then I hot glued it down. Then, to darken it up and help it all blend in, I took that Waverly Antique Wax and just dabbed that on top of my burlap. After that, it was time to add my dowel rods so we can stick this into a planter. But first, I had to create something that the dowel rod could actually stick to, because remember from the first time, these are concave in the middle, so there's a dip. So what I did was hot glue a popsicle stick over that caved in part, and then I painted it black, and then I hot glued a dowel rod onto the stick. Now, again, I did not do this, and I learned the hard way. You're going to want to use super glue and hot glue to glue that popsicle stick down. I had these falling off, and now I know anytime I work with metal, I need to use something along with hot glue, like a super glue. So after I put the dowel rod on, I went ahead and painted that black, and I did this to all 3 flowers. After I was done with that, I took one of these little metal planters and I stuck a big piece of foam in the middle. Then I kind of stuffed Dollar Tree bags, and you all know I have a ton of those, in around the foam to just kind of fill those holes so the foam wouldn't move. So I wanted to build it up a little bit. Next, I took my flowers and I stuck them in my foam. I put one in the back middle, and that one was the highest, and then I put 2 in the front, and those were different heights. You'll see here in a little bit. Again, my angles are going to be weird because this was just really high on my table and my camera angle was not the best. Now, for the flowers in the front, I did have to cut down the sticks just a little bit to get the height that I was going for. Next, I put some hot glue on the foam, and then I added some moss so I could hide the foam and the plastic bags. I really love how this came out. I actually gave it to my sister because she absolutely loves sunflowers and anything sunflower, and so it fits perfectly into her home. Now, this one, like I said, was a very popular one in that video, and I can link these videos to the end of this video or in my description box. So if you want to see the other ideas for these metal flowers, you can catch those in that video. But like I said, I thought this was so pretty. This would actually be perfect to make now for the fall, so I hope you love it. For my next DIY, I'm going to start off with this sign that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I really loved it because of the shiplap shape that it has. So of course I started off by taking my hair dryer and scraping that tag off, and 100 years later, after I finally got it off, I sanded it down. That way the surface was nice and smooth for me to paint. Now, before I did paint this, I did throw a little spackling in that hole and then sanded it down. And then I gave this a really good coat of plaster Waverly chalk paint. After my paint was dry, I took my ruler and a pencil, and basically I'm just lining up where those grooves are already, and I'm just going to draw lines all the way up my board. And again, like I said, I'm just using the grooves that are already there and basically attaching them. After I have all my lines drawn, I'm going to take my finger and run it over the pencil line to smudge it, and now this really looks like shiplap. Next, I took my chippy brush and that Waverly Antique Wax, and I distressed the entire sign. Then, to help all of my paint blend together, I sanded over it, and then I took my brush that the plaster paint was on. I did not dip it in new paint, I just used whatever was on the brush, and I just brushed over the Waverly Wax just to kind of dull it down, but help it blend all together. So for this project, I'll be using the metal truck that came from the Dollar Tree. And to start off with, I'm going to take a makeup sponge and that Waverly Antique Wax and just kind of go around the edges, a little bit on the inside, and just random spots of that truck to give it that rusty look. Next, I'm going to take 2 of the smaller little craft sticks, and I'm going to measure it down so it fits nicely on the bed of the truck. And then I'm going to cut down 2 other little pieces, and we're going to put it all together. So what I did was layer the longer sticks on top of each other and just provide a little gap in the center, and then I took those smaller pieces and I used those to connect the 2 longer pieces. So you'll see here, all I did was use hot glue for this, but dummy me forgot to measure the size of the smaller popsicle sticks. You can see that it's hanging off the bottom, so I just simply cut it off with my scissors. So I put one on one side, and then I'm going to put one on the other side. Now, my original plan was to stain this little piece with the Waverly Antique Wax, but I really liked the natural wood, so I just decided to dry brush the Waverly Wax over it. And then after that, I took that super glue and hot glue and glued the bottom of it to the top of the truck. Now, I purposely positioned it so it hid that hole on that side too. There is a hole on the other side, but I had no idea how to cover that. If you have some ideas for me on how to do that, let me know, because I would like to cover that. I just didn't think that wood filler and stuff would work. So next, I did want this to kind of sit up a little bit on my sign. So I took these tumbling tower blocks, and again, by using that fix-all glue and the hot glue, I'm going to glue these down. Now, originally I started off and I just put one over each tire, but I do end up adding one over the window as well. So now at this point, I couldn't decide if I wanted this sign to go long ways like that, or horizontal, or if I wanted it to go vertical. But either way, I knew that I wanted to use these amazing SOLA wood flowers. They sent me these flowers and asked me to use them in a DIY and to review them, and my review is 100% recommend. I absolutely love these. There's going to be a link in my description box below for these flowers. They are, believe it or not, made of wood, but they are so soft. They are easy to work with, and you can see that I am kind of manipulating them and squishing them together and positioning them how I like, and they are beautiful. The neat thing is that you could even get a package of plain white ones or beige ones, and you can dye them yourself. So you can make them whatever color you need. So I absolutely love these SOLA wood flowers. They are so pretty. There's a variety of different themes and colors and packages that you can get. And like I said, I 100% recommend. Please don't forget to check out the link in the description box below. But you're going to see that they made this DIY just so beautiful, and it made it pop. After I had all of my flowers glued down, I went ahead and glued down the truck. Next, I grabbed the Scrabble letters and spelled out Home Sweet Home. Now, it did take me a hot second to figure out how I wanted to position these letters, but finally, after I had them laid out how I liked, I just used some hot glue to glue them down. Then to give those a little rustic touch, I grabbed my chippy brush and my Waverly Antique Wax and dry brushed over the Scrabble letters. Then I decided I wanted the edges a little bit darker, so I hit those as well. Now there are no holes up top, so for the hanger, I took a piece of twine. I'm going to tie 3 knots on top of each other, and then I'm going to hot glue it to the front of my sign. Now before I hot glue the other end down, I'm going to add 6 20mm wooden beads to my hanger, and then to finish it off, I again am going to tie 3 knots on top of each other and then hot glue that to the front, and that completed the hanger. I also did brush over it a little bit with the Waverly Antique Wax, that way they weren't so stark wood, and it kind of gave that the rustic touch as well. I really love how this sign came out. It is so pretty, and this is definitely my second favorite one in this whole video, and it was a fan favorite in that original video as well. It's just so great, and I reluctantly gave it to my sister for her birthday because she loved it. So unfortunately I had to part with it, but I still love it. Hope you do too. For my next DIY, I'm going to start off with this pizza pan, and I'm going to give it 2 really good coats of the Plaster Waverly chalk paint. Now you can actually just skip painting the middle of the pan. You can just paint like around the perimeter of the inside. That way you don't waste your paint, but I just ended up painting the whole thing. Next, I took this placemat that I also got from the Dollar Tree, and this splatter screen actually fits perfectly inside the pizza pan, so I'm just going to use that to trace a circle around my placemat, and then I'm going to cut it out. Next, by using the Fix-All glue and the hot glue, I'm going to glue my placemat in the middle of my pizza pan. Then to give this a little rustic touch, I'm going to take my Waverly Antique Wax and I'm going to dry brush that over the edges of the pizza pan and on the inside of the placemat. Then to hide the rough edges of the placemat, I actually took pieces of a mop that I had left over from another DIY, and I just hot glued that around my placemat. After that, I did decide to go ahead and paint the back of my pizza pan as well. While that was drying, I took 3 plunger sticks that I got from the Dollar Tree, and the first thing that I'm going to do is unscrew the plunger part on all 3, and then I'm going to cut down the curved ends of each of the plungers. So how I did this was cut off one first and then use that to measure the other 2. Now, I started off by using this little saw from the Dollar Tree, and it worked pretty well at first, but then it kind of broke. So then I had to jump to my big saw. But either way, no matter what tools you use, you're going to want to cut off that curved part of the plunger stick. And like I said, I cut the first one and then I just used that to measure the other 2. After all my sticks were cut down, I did sand off the ends. That way they were nice and smooth. And then I used my hairdryer and my scraper to get all of those tags off. After that, I went ahead and painted each one of these sticks in plaster chalk paint. While those were drying, I took this teal pot that I got from the Dollar Tree, and by using my crocodile, I am going to punch 2 holes on 3 sides of this pot. I hope that made sense. You're gonna see what I'm gonna do. So after my holes were punched, I took a zip tie that also came from the Dollar Tree, and I loosely attached it together, and then once my plunger sticks were dry, I went ahead and slipped them in, and then I tightened my zip ties. And I did this to all 3 sides, kind of like a triangle. After all my sticks were zip tied onto my pot, I did take some hot glue and reinforce every surface that the stick was touching, and I also used super glue as well. This was going to go outside on my mom's front patio, so again, it was going to be in the sun, so I had to use something other than hot glue to glue this together. So I just went through and reinforced all of my sticks. After that, I cut off the extra part of the zip tie. Next, I took my pizza pan, and again by using the hot glue and super glue, I glued my pizza pan on top of my plunger sticks. I made sure to apply a lot of pressure on the top so the pizza pan would adhere to the sticks, and then I got smart and I flipped it upside down so that way all the weight was on the bottom. Then again, to give it extra support, I put some glue and super glue where my sticks were around the pizza pan, and then just went through and just kind of added some glue wherever I saw fit. I really love this table. It's been a few weeks since it's been outside, and hey, it's still standing. So using zip ties and glue wasn't such a bad idea, but my mom really loves it, and it really adds a fun pop of color to her front porch. Alright, we finally made it to my 10th and most favorite DIY this year. This one was also a fan favorite, and I love it. So what I did was start off with 9 of these crates from the Dollar Tree, and by using wood glue and hot glue, I'm going to glue all of them together. Then to help keep a strong hold, I'm going to put some clamps on until all the glue sets. Once all my glue dried, I took my clamps off, and then by using my Waverly Antique Wax, I stained this entire thing. Front, back, insides, sides. I wanted this to look so rustic, so I stained the entire thing. Now at first I started off by using a baby wipe to wipe it on, and it really worked pretty well, and I did this around the sides. Then for the insides of the crate, I actually used a foam brush, but I watered it down. I would dip it in water, and then I would dip it in to the Waverly Wax, and then I would stain the insides. Once my whole board was stained, I just took a baby wipe and I wiped over it just to get off any excess wax, and then I took my sanding sponge and I sanded the entire thing down to bring out some of that natural wood. Like I said, I really wanted this to be rustic. This was also inspired by something I saw at Hobby Lobby, so I was trying to get as close to that as possible. Next up, I took this picture that I got from the Dollar Tree and I unwrapped it from its plastic and took the hanger off the back, and then I'm going to remove the backing. Now, I really wanted to add some antique wax to this as well, but this frame is like a slippery plasticky. It's not wood, I don't think, for sure. So I needed to sand it down first. So then I went ahead and added the antique wax after I sanded it down, and it seemed to really help. And I used a baby wipe to apply it. After my frame was stained, I took the backing of that picture and I used my hairdryer to melt the hot glue that was holding it together, and then I used my scraper to carefully pry up the word. Now, I did end up breaking the word. I really wanted to save it, but it was an easy fix, and I did end up using it in another DIY. And then I wanted to try to preserve the paper underneath. It did rip a little bit, but in the end it turned out okay because it kind of just added to my rustic look, so I was okay with it. So where my paper ripped a little bit, I just went ahead and lightly sanded it down because I'm going to be stenciling over this, so I didn't want it to be very bumpy. So after I cleaned up that board a little bit, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and a makeup sponge, and I'm just going to dry brush over this sign, oh, I'm sorry, I took my distressing brush and I'm just gonna dry brush over this sign just to, of course, give it that rustic look. I really loved the paper as it was, but I kind of also wanted to camouflage the rips in it as well. After that, I took these stencils that I got from the Dollar Tree, and by using a makeup sponge and some black acrylic paint, I'm gonna stencil on the words Flower Market. After I stenciled on all of my letters, I took some white chalk paint and I dry brushed over my letters so they weren't so bold and black. Now, as you can see, they kind of came out a little messy. So what I decided to do was take my black paint pen and I'm going to outline each one of my letters. And I really do feel that this helped clean it up. Next, I'm going to put my backing back in the frame. After that, it's time to glue some dowel rods on my frame. That way we can attach it to the big crate we made before. But before I do that, I'm just going to dry brush a little bit of that white chalk paint over this entire sign. That way it all blends in nicely. Next, I'm going to take those dowel rods and I'm going to hot glue one on each side of my sign. Next, I'm going to take my baby wipe and dip it in the antique Waverly wax to stain my dowel rods. Once my dowel rods were dry, I'm simply going to hot glue the dowel rods to the back of my crate on the top. Now, to give this extra support, I'm going to take my painter tape and I'm going to tape these dowel rods down. And that is it. That completes my little flower market crate display. I will have the video to this linked at the end of this video so you can see how I made all of the other DIYs in this display. But I love this, and I think I really love it because you can change it out for every season, and I am so excited to change that flower market sign to a pumpkin patch sign and add some pumpkins for the fall. And here's an example of how I added some red, white, and blue for the 4th of July. I want to thank you so much for joining me for this super long video today. If you're still with me, I commend you. Thank you so much. You're going to have to let me know down in the comments, did you see these DIYs before on my channel? Or is this the first time that you have seen these? And if so, which one was your favorite? I want to remind you that if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, then hit that little notification bell so you can get notified anytime I upload a new video. Also, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you loved what you saw today. Well, until I see you again, I'll craft with you soon. Bye!